Hey guys, so this is admittedly the first time I'm doing a podcast, so it's going to be a lot more candid and it's not scripted or anything, so just bear with us. We're mostly going to be talking about budget decks and how playing with $25 budgets for the past 2 years has made us better deck builders.
Yeah, so I'm also here, I suppose. I'm in the Discord original username. Um, may have played a game with me. All of my decks, same with uh, Kago Rocks here, are $25 or less. So, and I think, yeah, I don't actually think I've made more than one deck that's been more than that since we started playing with that budget outside of Commander League.
Yeah. I think other than Commander League, we did. Let's see. I did the Judith deck at $50. You did Locust God at 100, and then you did
I did Tybalt at 50 as well.
Tybalt at 50, yeah. And then you also did a Kirik and Sakashima $100 deck. Um that was
No, true, true.
that was with Anya Falconwrath. That's what I did. I did Anya Falconwrath, you did Locust God, and we both just kind of like went ham for the win really fast.
Mhm. But even then, outside of the 50 or $25 budgets, we don't go super crazy, as you can quickly see a lot of commander decks go. Our idea of an exceptionally high budget would be $100 deck. So I would say even in our higher budget deck lists, they are relatively cheap compared to what you'll find at the average table for sure.
For sure. So let's start off with some of our favorite decks. What are we playing now? I'll let you start.
So probably my favorite deck to play currently is one that me and Tago actually worked on collaboratively. I had made a $25 Vela list that was fine, but it just ran out of gas and it didn't really do anything. So we sat down and we worked together on a way to make Vela really work. And the way that we decided to do that was basically just packing it full of removal engines, a bunch of really strong removal engine creatures like Drakuseth, Flame Blast Dragon, Magmatic Force, all those types of things. And so the deck basically just aims to ramp a ton and then either cheat them out with Vela or honestly, more realistically, just hard cast all of these super big threats and have really big swingy effects on the game out of nowhere.
It does it so well. It's so great at just throwing out a whole bunch of things which can threaten life totals and also help control the board and make for easier attacks. I love the Spella list so much.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your favorite current deck?
So my favorite one is actually a Golgari regrowth deck. Built this uh I built this like with regrowth in mind because I like that effect. And so what it does is it plays lots of tutors and acts as a toolbox deck. So what I'll do is I'll tutor for something like a Decree of Pain. So, for those not familiar, it's 6 black black. Destroy all creatures, draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. So, pretty good. So wipe the board, draw a whole bunch of cards, then tutor again. I'll go find the namesake of the deck, which is actually Seasons Past, and that allows me to return a whole bunch of cards from graveyard to my hand for 4 green each. Return any number of cards with different converted mana cost from your graveyard to your hand, then put Seasons Past on the bottom of its owner's library. I can use that to also return the tutor that I used for it in the first place, so I can tutor for Seasons Past again and again, and to actually progress my board state, I tutor for something like Boundless Realms, which is 6 and a green. search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of lands you control, and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library. So I start looping Boundless Realms to get all of my lands onto the field. With Seasons Past and the Tutor, I can loop board wipe, so I'm not really threatened. I have other effects which can make people discard their hands, and I actually close it out with something like Exsanguinate to drain everybody's life totals.
Those kinds of resource loops can definitely be a lot of fun to do. I was actually thinking. I have a question for you.
Yeah,
Do you have a deck that you made that performs well, but you just don't like? Budget deck you made, but you just don't like it for whatever reason, and why don't you like it?
a budget deck that performs well that I didn't like. So my first iteration of Athreos actually works pretty well, but
Oh, true.
because this iteration was just board wipe tribal. It was I'm running far too many board wipes, and the issue was that I wasn't able to actually like close in a reasonable amount of time, and yeah, so I I end up stealing your things and wiping the board over and over again and just pecking in for a little bit of damage, but I don't like it because it doesn't close fast enough, and it also makes people upset. I've since revamped the list to be something a lot more my style, where I get to run a lot of removal, but it has a lot more closing potential.
Mhm.
How about you?
For me, the only list that comes to mind for me would be honestly Hinata Dawn Crowned. Just because I mean it does everything really well, and it runs so much removal. It's able to really effectively lock down a game. But once it gets there, it can close fine. It's just the same gameplay every single time, and it gets really really boring really fast.
Oh, actually, this reminds me of my Unesh deck that I built. Unesh is basically Sphinx Tribal. Whenever it or another
Oh
Sphinx
yeah. Mhm.
enters, you factor fiction for 4, and it cost reduces Sphinx and by 2. And it's really good at just throwing out tons and tons of sphinxes, and the factor fiction gives the illusion of choice, like it matters. And I even built the deck to where it doesn't interact with the graveyard very much, if at all, because I want it to be a true choice, where if you decide to split the piles and I send something to the graveyard, I don't want it to just be, oh, I get that back and you get punished no matter what. So even though I'm not interacting with the graveyard, it still just throws out so many sphinxes and keeps my hand full. It's just it works really well, but it's not fun. Um no
Is
one
there a lot of
go
is
ahead.
there are there a lot of budget uh ways to get creatures back from Grave and Blue?
I don't know about getting them back from grave. But there's a lot of like returning instants and sorceries from grave to hand in which I could get like counter spells, removal spells, things like that, which
Oh,
is what
sorry.
I was actively trying to avoid.
I just read Unesh. For some reason, I thought it only grabbed creatures, but yeah, no, this is just factor fiction. Just factor fiction for 4 instead of 5 every Sphinx.
Yeah, which when you're dropping like 3 sphinxes a turn, you get so many cards in hand. It's absurd. So,
Uh,
go ahead.
you go. No, you
Okay.
can go ahead.
What are some things that we have learned? Some deck building pitfalls that we fell into whenever we started, but have learned to buff out in our most recent iterations.
Yeah, so I have one that comes to mind basically immediately,
Hmm.
and that is just running more lands. Partially for, of course, budget constraints, but that's rarely an issue anymore. That's why I started doing it, but also just because budget decks tend to perform better the longer a game goes. One of the main things that I think you have to sacrifice whenever you're making a budget deck is the ability to have better speed, whether that be in mana ramp or lower cost cards, whatever. So you want to be running a higher land total so that you can actually hit your land count every turn. I know that when I began building budget decks, I believe I was running about 36 lands on average. My
Yep.
land light decks would be 34. Now, my average deck has 38 lands. More and more, I'm heading up to the 40 land count, and my mana light decks never drop below 36.
Yeah. Yeah, that you're definitely right that lands are so strong, and I think even in budget lists, it's still kind of true that like uh lands are just so strong. Why pay mana ramping when you're just gonna end up getting to a late game situation where you're gonna be missing land drops? Like just wait a turn. Play another card. I don't know. That's just my opinion. But I think lands are very important and many players tend to cut them, and it heavily affects even small things like mulligans, which can drastically lower your win percentage. Something
Mhm.
that I actually found was that earlier on in deck building, we built lots of monolithy commanders, and they were they were basically all in on the strategy on what the commander wanted to do. I built an Obeka deck, which she can basically tap to end the turn, if it's your turn, effectively. And so you use that to get a whole bunch of things cheated out from the graveyard or tokens, just really anything that says at the beginning of your end step, it goes away. You get to keep it. But I found out pretty quickly if you don't have the commander, the deck doesn't do anything. So recently I went on this endeavor where I started building decks commanderless. I built a storm deck, a artifact deck, a aristocrats deck, basically just building things generic that work and don't require a specific card in your hand at all times, because that's effectively what commanders are. And so if we go
Mhm.
back to that Seasons Pass deck, I actually am running two commanders that don't matter at all. Si since the deck runs only 6 creatures without commanders, I went ahead and ran Falthis and Anara as the commanders, since I am just going to have them as blockers in the early game while I ramp up and greed to be able to get to my board wipe and tutors, since I have such a high curve.
Mhm. I have two comments on that. One far more anecdotal, and the other, I think, more logical in actually explaining why I think there's a major benefit to that. So more anecdotal is just I find that it building decks that aren't super monolithy and just building decks that can function without the commander, I find greatly increases how much fun I have at the table. For example, I recently built a Quick Son of Yawgmoth deck. Obviously, it's a commander people are going to kill, even though it's, a $20, $25 budget deck that doesn't run any infinites. They're going to see Quick, they're going to go, oh my God, I recognize that from CDH gameplay I saw 4 years ago. I'm going to lose the game in 2 turns, and they're going to kill him. So I've just started designing decks, especially with at all threatening commanders, to just not need them. And while I'll sit and I'll complain about, oh my god, why would you remove my commander? It doesn't ruin my gameplay experience if he gets hated out 13 times because my deck is designed to function completely without him.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I have built a few decks where you just run a really strong commander and it gets hated out. It You basically would have to make sure that the commander either gives you value right away, like for instance Emoti or Maelstrom Wanderer, which can cascade and help you find like ramp spells to recast them or just progress your board state, even if they get countered or removed, or just run tons of protection. um, Either that or just not care about the commander. Honestly, I
Mhm.
anymore I don't really build these super popular commanders because I feel they have stigmas attached to them and are going to be lightning rods for removal or targeting, and it's gonna lead to me losing a lot more life and board state than I really want to, because I'm not going to be building the deck in the super strong CDH fashion, but I am still going to receive that stigmatized hate, and that's what I want to avoid. So I'd much rather run something that's more niche and more synergistic or complementary to my game plan.
Absolutely. And then the second point I wanted to make was I do think that building horizontally, building with less of a care for the commander, at least the ability to win without it, going off of the idea that the commander is basically just an extra card or even two cards that sit in your hand every game. If I set a goal for a deck that I go, this deck wants to win on turn 8 or this deck wants to win on turn 10, a little bit more realistically, um, if I can design a deck that does that with 7 cards every game, and it can consistently win on turn 8 or 10 every game with 7 cards, suddenly having that 8 card hand means maybe you can win a turn earlier because you design the deck to not need it. It's just sort of an extra push over the edge to really do something. So I think that building on a budget sort of forces us to build decks that don't die to hate as much, and therefore just decks that perform a little bit better.
Exactly. I so what do you think is your strongest uh $25 budget deck you have right now? Like it would be able to pull up to the high power pod and hold its own.
Well, I have two answers for that. One of them is honestly Stills Vela. I think that especially because Vela is a commander that people are expecting big stuff, but they're not necessarily expecting the big stuff I'm putting down. I think that it can really do exceptionally well. So if I'm sitting down at a table with some other really strong decks, then I'm probably gonna bring Savella, unless I know that you are nowhere in the building. If I know that you specifically are nowhere in the building, I'm bringing Azami. Otherwise, I know that you're gonna convince everybody to kill me immediately, and Azami's not gonna do shit.
I mean, yeah, that's just how you play against Azami. Um, we can't let you
But yeah, so
live.
my Azami Lady of Scrolls deck I think is the objectively strongest. I don't run it as much now because it's not super fun to play against at most tables because it runs 20 counter spells and then 11 pieces of non counter spell removal and then just a bunch of wizards to cycle through to get to an infinite combo, which is fun for me, but I don't think very fun for everybody else.
Yeah, I think my strongest deck is probably the commanderless storm deck. I'll probably,
Mm-hmm.
whenever I actually play it, throw something like Vadrik in the command zone, since I think Vadrik's actually really underrated as far as how often it actually switches between day and night to cost reduce things, but it's a lot of effects like Confounding Riddle, where it's 2 and a blue and you can choose one. You can either counter a spell unless its controller pays 4, or look at the top 4 of your library, put one of them into your hand, and rest into graveyard. Something like that, where I can just hold up the 3 mana, and if they're going to play something that requires being countered, then I can fire off the counter spell, and if they don't, I haven't wasted my turn because I can still churn through my deck and find more really good pieces. All I really need to stick is just one thing that either cost reduces or copies, and from there I can generally just storm off into either a win or just such a commanding board state that you can't really deal with it.
Hmm. So, what is something that you do when building a budget deck that you think is uniquely different than what you do when building a non-budget deck, outside of course, just making sure that the cards cost less?
Interesting. I think that I would have to say my factoring in of threat assessment in deck building. So rather than just running the strongest cards for the deck that I want to build, I weigh whether or not it's going to require attention from the rest of the table, and if I'm okay with that attention at the point in the game in which I'd be playing the card. If I throw out turn 1 Soul Ring, then that's going to draw a lot of attention my way, and people are going to either kill the Soul Ring, kill me, or kill the things that come after the Soul Ring. And I don't like any of those options, so I'd much rather just not play Soul Ring and play a normal game of Magic where I don't get all of my things removed from the start of the game, where everyone has the most cards in hand and resources.
The Soul Ring hates really shining through with that one, huh?
I really don't like Soul Ring. Um,
I get it. I get it.
but yeah, on to you. What do you think?
Well, I definitely, like you said, I do absolutely more calculate in threat assessment. I also, I don't know if this is necessarily popular or common, but something I do that I tend not to do with non-budget decks is I definitely tend to factor in, at least considering running more protection for my big stuff, whether that be in the form of counter spells or equipment or actual just protection instance or something. I always tend to consider running protection for my big stuff more, because another thing you tend to sacrifice greatly with budget decks is resilience.
This actually segues into something I wanted to talk about a lot, which is tutors in budget
Mm.
decks. So I
So
have
many more
found
than people think.
that there's so much nuance to it, as well. So basically, when to run and when not to run tutors very heavily depends on the deck you're trying to build. Because a way of thinking about it is if I spend 5 mana on increasing ambition to go find Decree of Pain, right? I can I can think of it as Decree of Pain now costs an additional 5 mana to cast. So
Hmm.
rather than just being 8 mana, it would be 8 plus 5. 13 mana for Decree of Pain. Is it still worth it? Maybe, maybe not. In that deck, yes, it's definitely worth it, and that's why I'm willing to spend it. But it's not always the case that all of your cards are going to be worth the extra 4 or 5 mana to be able to play. With a lot of decks that I run that don't run tutors, I just run lots of other versions of the effect or unique synergies that most people may not even think about in order to circumvent needing tutors. Because if we have 15 copies of the same card just with a different name, you don't really need to tutor for it. And so therefore you wouldn't have to pay the extra mana to go find it, which can mean that you have actually saved a lot of mana and efficiency when trying to compete with other decks that do have better tutors and can find better cards off of that.
Hmm. Yeah, whenever I'm building a deck, even if it's in black, which has, I would say, by far the, if not the most, the best budget tutors, um, I don't. I don't really even consider it. Like I don't even really consider them unless it's a deck that specifically wants one card. Which outside of combo decks, I really don't think most decks want one card as much as they think that they do.
Yeah.
Like you said, any card that has a similar effect will do exactly the same, if not better, since it's functionally cheaper since you're not having to tutor.
And it doesn't even necessarily have to be the exact same effect. It could just be filling the same role. So for instance, if I'm in a black deck, right? I when you cast a tutor, you only go and find the best of every type of card that you run, right? Either it's you go find your best card draw, you go find your best closer, synergy piece, land, whatever it may be. But you don't necessarily have to have 15 copies of Grey Merchant of Asphodel because there aren't 15 copies of Grey Merchant of Asphodel. But Gary is a closer, and so if you run 15 or 20, 30, however many closers, then it doesn't necessarily matter because you can run cards like Phyrexian Triniform or Army of the Damned instead because they can help close you the game and you don't need that exact card to close you. If you do need that exact card, then that's fine. Tutors may be a worthy consideration, but just know that you would be spending an extra like 5 mana in order to cast that one specific card.
Mhm. Because like in something like, for example, the quick deck I was talking about, I tutor for Doomsday Excruciator, get Elixir of Immortality to hand as well, try and win the game through my stupid, goofy Elixir of Immortality combo. But if I had another copy of Doomsday Excruciator, if I could find that without tutoring, I would much rather.
What are some of your more jank pet decks that you like to play?
Ooh, that's a good question. I have to. Oh, easy one. Sauron Fling.
Oh, yeah, Sauron Fling is such a fun one. Just combat tricks and protection. Yeah.
Yeah, so the goal of Sauron playing it's Sauron, the Dark Lord, which is it's unique among my decks in that I usually don't run such expensive commanders, but the rest of the cards that I am running are so niche and bad that it doesn't really matter. That the commander costs like $7, and so it's just either get Sauron or an orc army to be really big, and then hit somebody and use a fling effect to just kill them.
Yeah.
Or if they're low life, just fling at them or something.
I I actually have two uh two of these decks that I really like. The first one is really interesting. I built this as a budgetless deck a few years ago, before I started this whole thing. And I've recently actually converted it to a budget deck, but it when I say jank, it's bad. It's 5 color Garth One Eye, and
Oh yeah.
the whole
Mhm.
deck is built around tutor for Platinum Angel, which is a fifth of the budget. um, Put it into play and then just try and protect it for as long as I can. I'll protect it with things like Blacksmith skill to give it hexproof and indestructible, or I'll just use counter spells to make sure it doesn't get swept up in something like a board wipe or really anything that could get rid of Platinum Angel. And then from there, the win con is tutor for something like Door to Nothingness and get a Door to Nothingness kill, which is really funny. Or
He killed me with Steven Dragon.
yeah, I've killed people with Shivan Dragon. Um, or I can just I can just beat people in the face with Shivan Dragon or Runescarred Demon. But generally by that point people have flying blockers. So my alt win con is just Brain Geyser. Just make you draw through your deck and deck yourself out. It will take forever, but you'll die eventually.
Fair, fair.
And then the second deck is much less jank. It's just not super great. It's a demon tribal deck. It is built commanderless, but I uh generally will run something like Rakdos Lord of Riots or Rakdos the Showstopper as the commander, and it's just 53 demons and 47 lands. There are no non-creatures in the deck, and I think there's only two cards which are less than 4 mana. There's
I
one
would
card.
classify that as I would classify that as pretty jank.
There's only one card that is under 4 mana, and it's Dream Devour because I love that card and I think it's
I
a
would
little bit
say I'd
underplayed.
say that's jank enough to be discussed here.
Yeah. Um Demons have lots of removal and discard and draw and stuff like that that it actually kind of functions. I've won with this deck before, which is
That's funny.
kind of funny. Yeah. Um
Imagine getting blown out by Joey Wheeler's deck. That's crazy.
yeah, I don't think I cast a single card until turn 6. And then from there I just
So
kept playing demon after demon.
I had a question. I had a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think that budget decks need more removal than the average deck?
I personally believe so. And the reason why is because budget list decks tend to have better cards. So you're competing with cards like Rhystic Study, Smothering Tithe, The Great Henge, all of these super staples that just can warp the game and win on their own. And they're extremely efficient, which is why they're so good. So you need to be able to remove them. And the great thing about removal is it doesn't see price. It just removes it from the board. And your Rhystic Study's pretty good on the board, but in the graveyard, it's just any other card.
Mhm. I think the final thing I wanted to ask you right now that came to mind was, do you have any advice for how to vet cards for budget deck building, like how to determine what's good enough, or how to find cards on a budget other than just spending time and like knowing Icar Elixir exists, knowing Urgolem's Eye exists, that kind of thing.
So, a couple things to note. One, if you check out my Moxfield, which I'll leave a link in the description, I have most of, if not all of my decks public, so you can take a look at them and see if you can find any interesting cards. I also have a budget veggies folder, which has a whole bunch of removal in there. It's got ramp, whether it be green ramp or non-green. I have some staples, which they may not all necessarily be staples, but they're just good cards that love to see play. And how I tend to find these cards is Scryfall, actually. You can search by budget, and I tend to do $1.50, and just look through a whole bunch of cards through there. You don't have to do that yourself. You can just you can go on something like EDHREC and search by cheap cards, and it'll show you things that will fit your synergistic deck and be more tailored to your game plan. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
I think that as long as you are aware of the EDH rec effect existing, then just going on there and searching by cheap can be a great way to get started and at least get you an idea of like cards that exist on a budget, even if you don't want to run them in that specific deck.
yeah, yeah,
Scryfall's obviously better, but if you don't feel like combing through actual thousands of cards with the same effect, that's all bad.
yeah. And what do you think is a the turning point deck for you that would that was a pivotal point in which you realized that, hey, I can start building differently.
That's a really good question. I'm gonna go over some of my decks here.
Yeah. I think for me it was actually my Giza and Geralf deck, which allowed me to do Fleshbag Marauder loops and make people sacrifice their uh, board states turn after turn, and that kind of taught me that I removal is really strong, and if I can keep people from having board states to begin with and utilize my graveyard for card advantage, I can do really strong things.
Hmm. So, funnily enough, I think that mine is also a graveyard deck that has really strong removal engines in it. I think that the turning point deck for me was my Carador Ghost Chieftain deck, which basically just cycled through a bunch of, reviving and sacrificing Shriek Maws, Rex Sages, my pet card in it, Spore Frog, to just stall out the game and either amass enough to swing out and win or get to one of the infinite combos.
Oh yeah, Carador is great. I love that list. And I also love being able to tell everyone you run an infinite and you're assembling the infinite and to quick kill him with fire. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah. No, that's a great list. Um,
But I think that that's and it taught me very similar lessons. You know, killing stuff means that even if they're trying to kill you because you have an infinite, they don't have anything to kill you with.
yeah. What do you think are the strongest themes on a budget?
That's a really good question. Very bland, boring. I think one of the strongest things you can do on a budget, big stompy, Gruul, Jund, just hit him in the face with big assholes.
Interesting. Yeah, that's true. Um, I think arguably though, more strong would actually be Blink. There's so many strong Blink cards which are under $1 that you can just very easily assemble an extremely oppressive Blink deck, like my Yorion Prison Realm deck, which just keeps you from having a commander and then a board, and then just churns through my deck with eggs until I
And
assemble
then
an
makes you want
infinite.
to flip the table and quit Magic forever. Yeah, yeah.
Oh
I get.
yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I think Blink is really strong. I also think that Landfall is really strong, but that's those two are just kind of strong period because Landfall is really good since lands don't really get removed and it's
Mhm.
against the social contract, and Blink is just really good because it's hard to deal with ETBs other than stacks pieces or counterspells, which are frowned upon.
This is not gonna it's this isn't exactly a super helpful answer, but I think that as well, just one of the stronger things you can do on a budget is just something weird that people haven't really thought of as much or haven't done a ton, because if you do that you're going to use cards that are cheap because they're probably bad. So one of the best themes you can do is to just take a card and be inspired by it and do some stupid combo, infinite or not.
Yeah. Oh yeah, shout out to my friend. Whenever we first started this, he made a Falthus Jeska deck with
Mm.
Obosh as the companion. This deck is so cool because it's a removal engine in the command zone. Since Falthus gives your commanders death touch, and Jeska, even though it's a planeswalker, is your commander. So you can downtick to just shoot things and kill it. And then uh you can add Obosh to your hand and play it. And then when you're getting ready to kill someone, after you've Voltroned up Falthus just a little bit, you zero tick Jeska, and then it has double damage from Obosh and triple damage from Jeska. It kills people so well. I love this deck. It's so creative.
I will say, it took me a while to realize, but we've just played in a lot of pods with just really strong removal engines. It's no wonder we like them so much.
Yeah, yeah. We really have. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing though. There are a lot
No,
of
I don't. I
players
don't
that
either.
really like removal, and there are a lot of players that really don't like removal. A funny comment that I got on one of my previous videos was, let's see here, it was, yeah, I thought the more removal the better, but recently I played the game when opponent had so much removal that I was basically stuck for 5 turns doing nothing until I died. So yeah, if you hate fun and want to lose friends, play more removal. I thought that
On
was,
one hand, I feel bad for their experience. On the other hand, I feel like they need to watch the video about making sure you have better card selection.
yeah, that it was just so funny because it escalated so quickly. They went from, yeah, removal's pretty good to, oh, someone played removal against me. So if you hate fun and want to lose friends, play removal. Um but yeah, that's going to conclude the uh podcast for today. Very open and just candid. Like, we didn't really script any of this, and it probably shows.
It almost certainly shows.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it. Bye.
You need to get better at this, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really do. Bye.
Yeah, bye.